Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps by AOPA.
At Ask the A&Ps, we try to take your toughest maintenance questions, and sometimes we answer them, sometimes we just kind of fake it.
Not your toughest.
But you know, when we do the normal podcast, we actually get to see the questions a day in advance.
And study.
And one of us actually studies for it. But when we do it live, this is the second year that we're doing it live, we have no idea what you're going to ask. So you can't imagine how terrifying this is.
It's like we're up here naked.
Yeah.
No, but I never look at the questions in advance, which if you listen to the podcast, you already know that. Yeah. So this feels really natural to me.
Yeah, it's no different at all for Paul, right?
So this is a really cool, every AirVenture is cool. I'm just now getting used to saying AirVenture instead of just Oshkosh. Mm-hmm. This is my 20th year in a row coming, so this is pretty cool. But I got to do this dawn patrol yesterday in a P-51. Wow.
Back seat.
Over the top. Yeah, okay, back seat, right.
Good point, Mike.
Yeah, there was this big
There's
thing
always
in the
somebody's
morning
got to
where
rain on your parade.
He hasn't stopped talking about it
they
since.
said you can have a fresh donut right out of the fryer, or you can go on a P-51 ride. I did the donut.
I took the donut.
It was cool. I've never sat in a P-51, and I've not done formation flying. I got both of those checked off yesterday morning. My pilot was an A-10 pilot.
Very cool.
And
So he didn't know anything about.
he didn't know anything about formation, but I'm telling you, there was some stenciled lettering about this tall on the bottom of the lead airplane's wing that I could read.
Yeah.
Wow. Anyway,
Lucky dog.
yeah. Colleen's still mad at me.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
That's a bucket
Sounds
list
great.
item.
Yep.
Yep. Well,
I got a brand new borescope. I went to the Oasis Scientific booth and got a new borescope.
They
I'm just
insisted
so
we take it,
excited to
yes.
look at
Insisted
something
he
with
take
he
it.
said, please sell more of our borescopes. It doesn't happen all the time.
Who has a borescope? Wow. Oh,
I got
that's awesome.
It's got chills.
Totally awesome. I can't believe that.
You know, this is called,
But you know, if this was not an audience of podcast listeners, that probably
Yeah.
It'd
They'd
be
be
different.
like, what's a borescope?
Yeah, well, that's-
Or what?
this is
that is
called
really gratifying.
preaching to the choir, apparently. So, all right.
But is
And
it
how
not-
many of you got a borescope because your mechanic didn't have a decent borescope?
Ah,
Okay.
Wow.
good job.
Colleen, what did you see that got you excited?
Donuts. I saw I really like the donuts here. They're amazing.
All
Okay,
right,
Dave.
all right. In the interest of time, since y'all have some really good questions, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask at least a couple to get it going, and then we'll start to rev around when we can. And this is interesting. Who doesn't want to get more horsepower out of their airplane? For the Ask the A&Ps, can you widen the gap in the spark plugs to get more horsepower from an engine?
Sorry. Yeah, get that screwdriver right in there.
Shall we do this all in unison?
Can you
No,
widen the
no.
gap at all?
Well,
Oh, of course you can.
so you got to ask the race pilot.
I've never heard that.
That is-
Make it harder for that spark to jump.
Well, if you widen it like to this, it doesn't spark at all, right?
So
Yeah.
you're saying, can you replace it with a spark plug with a wider gap? I
No.
think That's what he's asking.
Gap the plugs.
It just kind of, well, how do you widen a gap? I
Well,
mean,
you put a
can-
screwdriver in there. Of
Yeah,
course, in the
How
How
process,
do you
you
widen
break
the
the
gap?
ceramic.
You,
It says you're
you
not
wait for
supposed
a
to-
while and it does it all by itself.
Oh my gosh.
It automatically does that.
I'm not sure that would do
But
what he wants.
when every year when I pull my spark plugs, I always tighten the gaps down
'Cause
right
it's
to the minimum, which is
eroding.
16,000.
Yeah.
16 thousandths. all the way.
And the reason it's particularly important for me is that I fly a turbocharged airplane. And if you go up high and the spark plug gaps are too wide, you start getting what's called high altitude misfire, which can at least cost you change underwear at
Yeah.
minimum.
It's going to
So-
spark somewhere.
Yeah.
You want it to spark at the spark plug and not somewhere previous to that.
But I don't think closing the gap is going to give you a stronger spark.
No, it doesn't give you a stronger spark.
Yeah,
What it does is it maximizes the likelihood that the spark
Will
will
occur.
happen at the spark plug
Yeah.
rather than inside the magneto. It's
Yeah.
actually more important if you have small magnetos like slicks.
Right.
If you've got the big
Bendix.
Bendix S1200 giant tractor mags, then you can get away with wider gaps.
Right.
Unless you fly way up high in a turbocharged airplane like I do sometimes, and then you need to
Yeah,
have.
so I think the answer,
Yeah.
unless we misread that question, I think the answer is
No,
don't go
no,
there.
let's don't do
I
that.
would say it's a definite no on that. And I
Okay.
forgot to say who the question was from, so the next one, I'm going to read your name up.
Wait,
Mess it up.
you may not want their name read.
That's why I didn't read it. All right, Richard.
Undisclosed questioner.
Richard,
Richard, where's Richard?
Richard.
P-I-T-T-E-T.
If you're not willing to raise your
All right,
hand,
I'm
we're
going to
not
run
gonna
over
do the
there like The Price is Right or something like that. I'm going to let you ask the question,
all
Richard.
right.
And Richard is from Calgary, right?
Oh, God's country.
Oh, where the smoke is coming from.
Oh, my.
That's the guy. Right there. Everybody look.
That was U.S. Imported smoke that we sent.
Oh.
They keep the good stuff for themselves and they export the bad stuff.
Now, I have a 2002 182 Cessna, and if you look at power, it can be achieved by low MP and high RPM or vice versa, which will cause less strain on the engine.
Oh, less strain on the engine. I don't know that it really matters,
Yeah.
but your engine probably prefers the lower RPM,
RPM.
higher manifold pressure.
RPM is a lot of strain.
Yeah.
Low RPM and high manifold pressure within the envelope that is allowable, and this is a restart 182, so it's
Yeah,
got
so
a Lycoming
Lycoming,
engine.
IO540.
Typically, those engines, I don't have the book in front of me, but typically those engines are allowed to be like 5 inches over square or something.
Oh, yeah. So you look in the POH and there's all the charts. So you have all the different RPMs and all that manifold pressure. And if you look at the 2500 RPM or 2400 RPM, 23 and 22, different manifold pressures, same percent power
Yeah.
will yield the same fuel flow and the same speed. So if you want to fly at 65% power, you can do it at various RPMs. If you're going to fly high, you're going to have to increase the RPM just to get the power up because you run out of air. But
Yeah, most of the time, I don't know why it works out this way. It's probably coincidence. Most of the time, lowering the RPM by 100 and raising manifold pressure by 1 inch, usually just about.
Equal.
Yeah, it's not exactly, but it's a
Yeah.
close rule of thumb.
so you
But it's
have-
always better to run low RPM and high manifold pressure, which when I learned to fly 182 back in 1960-something,
Ooh, dating yourself.
my flight instructor said, if you do that, it's going to blow up the engine. And I believed that for a long time. And then I finally discovered that Charles Lindbergh was the guy
yeah,
that taught
right.
the military aviators in World War II how to fly, low RPM, high manifold pressure, and extend the range of their airplanes and everything.
so they could follow the bombers.
So then I said, well, I wonder what the engine manufacturer has to say about it. And so I got the books from Continental, and they said it was okay to fly
Yeah.
over square. And so,
Yeah, there's nothing in any of the manuals where it says, over square. It doesn't ever say don't do that, and it never has.
it's just a flight instructor.
It's a flight, sorry. It's a flight
All right, all the
instructor thing.
CFIs in here. Yeah.
And there's probably some mechanics. So if you want to find out if this is a real thing, convert manifold pressure into millibars, and suddenly it doesn't work.
Oh, geez, Paul.
No,
I thought you were going to
that's
say newtons per furlong
No.
or something.
the only reason we ever came up with this is it just so happens that on most normally aspirated engines, 2,400 RPM and 24 inches is about 75%.
Right.
And then somebody said, well, 24, that's square. Oh, wow, now we've got something we can teach people. It's wrong.
But 2,200 RPM and 26 inches is also the same amount.
Right, but
But
that's
it's not
not
square.
catchy.
And that's a
not
better
catchy.
way to do it.
It absolutely is. So instead of 24 inches, if we use millibars, Well, you can't make those numbers work anymore. So now you don't know if you're over square or not.
I
How
did
about
an EAA
hectopascals?
webinar. It's on the YouTube channel.
Hectopascals, we should go with that.
That works
Yeah.
too.
How about the next question, David?
But it was called The Joys of
come
Over
on.
Square.
Okay, moving on, as we like to say on Hangar Talk. Ian says it all the time. All right, I'm going to just read the question because we have a full house here, but raise your hand. Julie McShay. Okay, all right, Julie, if you don't mind, let me read the question, 'cause you're pretty far back over there. And I think this is interesting for a lot of folks, like myself, that have vintage aircraft that are a little bit older. Julie's from California, and she wants to know why the jet is flying over now. No, she wants to know, with the GA fleet aging, can you please address the needs and regulations about owner-produced parts?
Oh.
And she has a 79 Grumman Tiger, and we just want to know a little bit more about owner-produced parts. Like, can you build a whole gas tank if you have the filler nozzle?
Yes.
Filler. Okay.
Okay, well, what you just brought up with the making a gas tank from the filler port is not an owner-produced part. It's a repair. So and that wasn't a joke. But there's this basic concept that if you have something that's broke, but you can salvage any part of it, you can build all the rest of it and call it a repair rather than an owner-produced part, which makes it a whole lot simpler. Because there is no regulatory limit on how extensive a repair is allowed to be. So we sort of have an A&P joke called the golden rivet,
That is,
which is like if you can salvage one rivet from whatever it is, you can build the rest of it around it. The only thing that gets difficult with airplanes is if you lose the data plate, then it gets really
yeah,
complicated.
keep the data
But
plate.
So we've been fabricating skins, like for gear up landing repairs or whatever, and this is totally legit. And even if the FAA happens to be in the room, they may not admit it, but anyway, if they're here, you can drill a torn up skin off the belly of a 210, lay it on top of a new sheet, use it as a pattern, make the sheet, because in the service manual it tells you the skin is made out of 2024 T3, it is 32 thousandths thick. I can use that as a pattern, fabricate a totally new part. No, don't even have to have a golden rivet for this one.
yeah.
Slap it right back up on there, and that's perfectly legit.
But you didn't fabricate the skin. What you did was repair the assembly, right?
I fabricated a repair, and I'm very careful about that in the log entry. What I also can't do is I can't fabricate that repair and send it to somebody somewhere else for them to put on. Now I have fabricated a part and sold a part, and I don't have parts manufacturer approval.
Yeah, I once on my airplane had a rigid oil line that supplies the turbocharger, and it something chafed against it. I forget. There was a tie wrap where it should not be or something, and so I was going to order another line from Cessna. This is back before I was an A&P, and my mentor said, "Oh, we don't need to do that." He said, "As long as we can save the bee nuts, we can repair that line." So we went out and we got a bunch of tubing, got a flaring tool, saved the old bee nuts, and
actually now,
repaired the
with-
bad line.
with CAD drawing, you can actually do an image of a part and then 3D print it and then provide the 3D printed and have somebody fabricate it for you.
So if you're going to actually make a part, owner produced, which is more to the question, you can't just go down to Harbor Freight and get something that looks sort of like it and throw that on your airplane. An owner produced part still has to meet the same spec. So the first thing is you have to find the spec. What is the spec for this part?
What's it made of?
And you're talking to Grumman, where's the factory, who has the spec? If you can find the spec and you can replicate the part and show that you've met the spec, that's a good owner-produced part. How do you get your IHO approval?
First, you make them cookies.
That's the really important issue here.
Yes, it is.
Owner can produce a part, and for a part to be owner produced, The owner had to just have something to do with the production.
Right.
He doesn't have to do it in his basement with his own
not a
hands.
51%
He can,
rule.
get a machine shop to do it. If he supervises it, if he provides the drawings for it, if he provides any of the materials, it qualifies as an owner-produced part. The tricky part with owner-produced parts is getting a mechanic to install the part, because then the mechanic is going to want some assurance that the part is airworthy. And most mechanics are going to be a little bit gun-shy about installing an owner-produced part unless they're really quite sure that the part is airworthy. So the best way to ensure that your mechanic will be comfortable installing the part is to enlist him as a co-conspirator in the creation of the part, so that he's involved in it, and then, he's probably going to be comfortable installing it. But the tricky part is not the producing the part, it's getting someone to install it, that someone is going to want to have some assurance that the part is airworthy, meets the type design of the aircraft. We're talking about certified airplanes here. Experimental aircraft, and you can do anything you want.
All right, you want to add something, Paul?
Well, the thing to know is the person installing the part, your A&P, IA, they are the ones that are carrying the burden. So you fabricate a part, you have no liability in the fabrication of the part. The mechanic that installs the part is signing not only for the installation, but for the airworthiness of the part. They get all of the liability. So just when you're doing this, that's what you need to be aware of. They're signing their career away on that garden hose that you provided as your oil line.
As your oil line.
So,
Good question.
yeah,
Good
that's
question.
really good.
Okay, the next question, I'm going to probably not pronounce your name right. Vedant, V-E-D-A-N-T, Vedant, from New York. Nashua, New Hampshire. Sorry about that. I'm going to just read your question number 2 out of the 7 questions that you wrote down. Just teasing. There were 2 down here. But I think this one, a lot of people will have probably the same question.
Sure.
So how many more hours can I expect, given that I have 2,900 hours right now on the engine in a 836 Bonanza? The compressions are good, and it consumes about 1 quart of oil every 20 hours. I know the answer to that, but go ahead, guys and gals.
That
Okay, well,
sounds like a new
first of
answer.
all, I want to give a little plug to the forum I'm going to do right after we're done here in forum. I think it's 8. Sorry. The title of the forum is TBO 5000. It's a story of how we took a Skyhawk engine out to 5,000 hours and kind of how we did it. The question is, how long can you expect that engine to last? And it's an unanswerable question, and it's not a question that is even worth asking. You need to put the engine on a good conditioning monitoring program, and then just fly it until it starts telling you that there's some reason to tear it apart. We don't like to tear apart engines unless there's really a compelling reason to do that.
Yeah, you can't predict what's going to happen or what's going to go wrong, but you can see these early stages of things going wrong, and that's what condition monitoring does. It gives you signals that maybe you should anticipate pulling a cylinder or changing some other part. So, but it sounds, if your engine is burning 1 quart in 20 hours, I don't think even new my engine was doing that. So that's wonderful. It sounds like it's in great shape.
Yours engine is over TBO, right?
Oh, yeah.
And if I ask you how long you're going to fly it, you're going to say, I don't know.
Until I can't.
Yeah, the engine's doing better than I am.
I know that he's going to fly it for a long time, and the way I know that is in a moment of weakness, and he did this without consulting me. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Because I don't do anything without consulting Paul, but he actually pulled 2 cylinders off
It's
this
so
engine.
embarrassing.
And, there wasn't anything wrong with the cylinders, but
He wanted lamp bases.
he just had this insatiable curiosity to look at his cam.
I gotta look in there.
Which
What's
is
in
like
there?
crazy, but he did, and it looked pristine. Everything in the bottom end looked pristine. They put
You
it
should
back
imagine
together.
what our conversations are like at the house in the evenings.
Yeah.
So speaking of cylinders, cylinders are an accessory. So you talked about your oil consumption and compressions, which compressions are kind of marginally valuable. But if you got cylinder problems, you change cylinders. You don't overhaul an engine. You can have, on a really rare occasion, somebody might have 6-bagged cylinders, but that like never happens. But we're spring-loaded to do a top overhaul. But the bottom end of the engine is perfectly fine. And by the way, I looked at the camshaft so that I would know if it was going bad. I wanted to do something proactive so I didn't have to pull the engine. And I did the cylinders because I follow the rules. I know you think my airplane's a flying experiment, don't touch anything if it's, but
Experiment.
when the oil consumption exceeds Continental's limits and I'm in for annual, I follow the rules. And it's like, well, I got to do something about it. So I did a ring wash, which you can do. I identified the 2 cylinders that were causing my problem, and I'm happy to report I went from a quart per hour to a quart in 8 hours.
Oh, very good. So there are really only 2 good reasons to overhaul an engine. One is that you have compelling evidence that there is something wrong in the bottom end of the engine that can't be rectified without splitting the case. The other good reason for overhauling an engine is you just can't sleep at night. And then some people do it that way. The first time I overhauled an engine, I went to 500 hours over TBO, and I just, I still had the taste of that TBO Kool-Aid in my mouth, and I just said, I don't want to push my luck. So at 500 hours over TBO, I had 2 engines overhauled on the 310.
And it was
And I went down to the engine shop when they had it all in pieces on a cart because I wanted to look and see what it looked like. And it was like totally pristine. There was not anything wrong with it. And I said, I'm never going to do that again.
And I want to just say, my one comment, I did the same thing, peace of mind, because my husband told me to do it, and I didn't want to do it, but
Don't listen to your husband.
Once I did it and overhauled the engine, then it was like, oh, what's in there now? I was so comfortable with my old engine. I knew exactly how it ran. I just introduced all these new parts that could break or have, and sure enough, an AD came out. Luckily, it didn't hit me, but it could have. And it was because all new parts went into the engine. So think about it before you jump. If you like your engine, you have a good relationship with it, you might want to extend that. It's kind of like a spouse. Think about it before you jump.
I was going to say a fine wine, but I like a spouse.
I'm not
better.
giving
Yeah.
relationship advice here, just think about it.
I'm sticking with my starter wife.
With your starter wife?
Yeah.
I like it. And
Okay,
well,
David.
moving on, as we like to say now, Colleen, listen up for this one because you're a Cessna owner, single-engine Cessna owner. This is not a Cardinal.
Okay.
It's a Cessna 182 owner. Terry, I'm going to ask for you. Terry, first of all, says thanks for what you all do.
Thank you.
So,
You're
big
welcome.
hand for that. All right. Terry has a Cessna 182R with the 470 carbureted engine.
472.
Terry cannot seem to keep cylinder number 1 below 380 to 390 degrees on hot days at altitude. If Terry richens up the mixture, it does help. If Terry cracks open the cowl flaps, the problem is solved. Wondering about new engine cowlings, are they needed? Are all the engine flap cylinders...
Baffling.
Baffling, that's what I think you were talking about. The same. And notice, are they different per cylinder? Thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind when there's one cylinder that's running hot, and it kind of depends on what cylinder it is.
Number 1.
He
said number 1.
Oh,
in the
number
back.
1,
Yep.
okay. Well, number 1 is the right rear
Yep.
cylinder. So the first thing is that right behind it is a big vertical baffle.
Yep.
And you might want to look and see if there are any big holes in it where cooling air can escape rather than
Yeah,
cooling.
no
He
holes.
says he got that. So,
Okay.
So moving on.
How about the
What else
spring
could
that
it be?
wraps around the cylinder to hold the baffle up against the cylinder? Oh, there's one.
It's hard. I have the same problem in
And the
my
other thing
Cardinal.
is are the inner cylinder baffles, which
Yeah.
are really easy to slip a little bit out of
Or
place
put
on
in
Continental.
backwards or, yeah, put the,
But
no.
there's a little
No,
baffle
you're right.
We've
down
seen that.
between 1 and 3
It-
that's really hard to see.
When it's just one cylinder,
Yeah.
it's usually airflow, and it's usually in the back, and you could have an accessory that's tapping airflow off, like, I don't know about the 182, but an oil cooler or a mag blast tube or something like that. But that cylinder is very difficult to get airflow to. In the Cardinal, my number 3, which is in the back in front of the co-pilot, is also the hot cylinder, and there's a modification to the baffling that we can do that we call the doghouse, which basically creates a little tube that the air can, it encourages additional airflow past that cylinder. No, I
He
don't.
can't do that.
He can't do, there's no room, right?
There's no STC,
Right.
Oh,
because that would be an
owner
STC.
Changing to
produced
the cooling
baffling,
system.
right?
That's a, no. Owner-produced parts, you produce the same part.
Oh.
This would be an alteration. That's a different set of rules.
Technically, any change of the cooling system is a major alteration, so.
Yeah.
But he needs more airflow.
Well, maybe. What he also needs to do is a lean test and an in-flight induction leak test.
yeah.
Okay, yep, could be a lean cylinder.
Yeah.
That's how one cylinder could be hot. is
So I know,
it's-
you don't have injectors, that's okay, you can still do a lean test. Go to the GAMI website and tell you all how to do that. But you also do an induction leak test. This is really geek out stuff. This is fun.
Yeah, you have to
everybody-
have an engine monitor to do it.
Yeah, do you have an engine
But I'm
monitor?
sure
Okay.
it does,
So
yeah.
who has an engine monitor?
Yay! Hey, that's
You are our favorite crowd.
bigger every year.
Every year, this is awesome.
Used to be 50%.
It's a
Looks like it
revolution,
was about
yeah.
70%
So
now.
I'm going to tell you how to do this, and then Mike and Colleen are going to pick up on the things that I said wrong, because it's hard to talk and think at the same time. So here's the deal. You're going to go to like 6,000 feet. You're going to set the manifold pressure to roughly what ambient pressure is. And what that does is, because you have a normally aspirated engine, if there's a leak in the induction system, because you're always in a vacuum in your induction system, if the vacuum in the induction system is the same pressure as the ambient, no air will flow through the leak, right? Just cruise along, notice all your EGTs, pull the throttle back to change the manifold pressure by about 7 inches. Now you've created a 7-inch differential. If there's a leak, it's going to happen. And the one cylinder that, if you have a leak, the cylinder that has a leak is going to go much leaner than the other 5, and you'll see that in a difference in the EGTs. 5 cylinders will go one direction, and 1 cylinder goes the other. And this is not something your mechanic can do, but this is something you can do because you can be airborne while you do it. And if you have anyway, it could be the gasket right where the induction tube bolts to the cylinder, or it could be the connecting tube on the induction pipes. But you can stick air pressure in the induction system, blow it all day long, but the induction system in your airplane is never under pressure. It's always in a vacuum.
Vacuum.
So when you're flying, you can actually create that vacuum. Anyway,
A
whether
leak-
you need to or not, now you all have to go do that. You've got a 3-hour flight home. What else are you going to do?
Yeah, really.
You know.
Paul, you did that pretty well.
He's good.
You
See? I
just
told you.
did one thing a little bit more complicated than it needed to be. You did this big thing about having manifold pressure about outside ambient. That's called full throttle. That's all you have to say, full throttle.
Yes.
Okay, speaking of flights home, unless, do y'all have more to add?
no, we're
Okay.
good.
All right, speaking of flights home, all right, how many people flew in here today for this? Okay, quite a lot, a few people drove. But for those flying in, this is a question from Rex White of Wisconsin. For the last several months, I have operated my Cessna 182 in smoke-filled skies. How much of this has happened to y'all? Yes, all of us. So the question from the Canadian fires, and it could be from the fires out west, which we've had too. The question is, are there detrimental effects on the engine to be concerned with, such as particulates working their way through the induction air filter?
Rex, have you heard our last podcast? Because this was the exact question that was asked by somebody from the Pacific Northwest.
It hasn't been published
It
yet.
hasn't been published, so we'll give you the very short answer.
Oh, well, they need to pay attention to the podcast too.
Yeah,
in
well,
2 weeks,
is-
when
that
it's out.
question, that very question was asked, and we
Right.
had a long discussion about it, so.
And what did you come up with?
Basically, the consensus opinion was that the smoke isn't going to hurt the engine, but it would be a good idea to change the oil more often than usual, and it would be a good idea to change the induction air filter more often than usual, especially if it's something, like a bracket filter that's.
Yep.
But it won't hurt the engine. The only thing that we know of that really hurt the engine flying
Volcanic
through
ash.
is volcanic ash, which
No volcanoes.
I
Don't
don't
do those.
think Canada's been sending any of that,
Yeah.
as far as I know.
They're all real nice. They wouldn't do that.
And
to
your
us.
airplane will get dirty, but the
Yeah.
bugs are worse.
So change the oil a little bit more frequently.
And the air filter.
And the air filter as well. That makes sense. That, like motorcycles would be the same way if you're running a dirt bike in the woods, that kind of thing. Okay.
Yep.
All right, since we have about 30 minutes left, I'm going to ask this question about leaning, because
Oh,
it'll
geez.
probably take us to the end of the session.
No, wait.
We'll
Everybody here has a borescope.
Yeah.
Everybody here has an engine monitor. There won't be any controversy for leaning in this
okay.
group.
Everybody already knows the answer to whatever
Yeah.
you're going to ask.
Well,
we should let them in.
If they listen to you or read Mike's columns in AOPA Pilot, they would probably know. But we're here and we want other people to find out. So Tim Long of Texas wants to know about leaning in his Mooney M20C, which I used to have one. And also we talked a little bit about the baffles and things like that. That's also a critical element to keep the cylinder head temperature cool. But leaning in the O360A1D engine on the M20C, do I lean it until it runs pretty smooth or completely smooth? I often get it pretty smooth, but it still thumps periodically, once a second or so. Is that bad for the engine?
I want
General discussion on leaning.
I want a definition of pretty smooth.
It sounds like rocks rumbling around under your feet. That's when the exhaust, because you're feeling
Yep.
the mist.
Well,
your
we like
misfires.
to, at least Paul and I don't know, Colleen is a little bit less
like going
aggressive
fast.
when she's a fast.
I like
she's
smooth and
yeah.
fast.
But Paul and I like to lean pretty aggressively, and there are a lot of advantages to that. Besides fuel economy, which is particularly important to me because I fly a twin that gobbles fuel like crazy. It's cleaner, it's cooler, it's gentler to the engine. The power pulses are all of the impulse pressures in the engine are less. The bearings were less, but the leaner the mixture is, the engine will run a little bit rougher, just inherently due to something called cycle-to-cycle variation, where it's harder for a spark plug to ignite a lean mixture than a rich mixture. So there's a certain amount of randomness that occurs from the time that the spark fires to the time that the flame front actually gets organized. And it varies. There's more variation in that when the engine's running lean. So it's naturally a little bit rougher, but you don't want to run it so rough that your significant other says, "What the hell was that?" But if you want to run the engine lean, which Paul and I like to do, you need to accept a small amount of additional roughness.
But if it's not
just-
comfortable,
Yeah.
fly it where you're comfortable.
Yeah, don't let it be as rough enough that you're uncomfortable about it. But it's not going to hurt the engine. It's just going to spook your passengers.
So I think the questioner's concern is that you back off too lean and make it richer so it sounds a little better. Are you too close to peak and going to damage the engine? And the answer is
Wait,
if you're
we have to have an
below-
engine monitor, right?
Well,
We have to know.
Yeah.
The basic answer is you look at your CHTs. And if your
Right.
CHTs aren't excessive,
Right.
and we consider anything that starts with a 4 to be excessive for a Continental engine. For Lycomings, we're willing to see it go to 420 before we start wincing. If you can get 20 degrees cooler than those numbers, that's really
Yeah.
great. 380 for a Continental, 400 for a Lycoming is just sweet spot. But if the CHTs aren't excessive, then you're not in the red box and you don't have to worry about it.
And if you're at 65% power or below, if
Yeah,
you're
there
up
might not
high,
even be a
you're
red
also,
box.
you
Yeah.
can't hurt it at all.
Right, because you're below top power, so not much you
Yeah,
can do.
so experiment. And if you don't like the way it sounds, don't fly there.
But, you know,
there's
a lot of
benefit.
people are afraid to play around with the red knob. You should experiment, play around with it. You're not going to hurt anything.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be complicated.
No.
You know, when I flew 182, pulling it back until it felt like it was rough, and then richening it until it wasn't unacceptably rough, it's a perfectly good way to fly it, and it's a lot better for the engine than running it rich.
I have a little problem with my plane right now is that it doesn't run rough. I
Just
lean it,
quits.
and I lean it, and I lean it, and pretty soon it's like, I'm not sure if it's running or not. and then, you know, I'm descending, and everything's great, and I level off and realize, my engine's not running. It's, you know, 100-degree CHTs. Maybe I'll, you know.
100 degrees.
Oh, I've done that.
Paul's a glider pilot. Good question.
All right, we're going to ask one more question. This is a Cessna 172 question.
All these guys Cessna owners?
This is from David Berman. Raise your hand, Dave. Where are you?
Right here.
Up front.
Hey,
He's
Dave.
supposed
Oh,
to
you're so
throw
close. I'll
something
let
at
you
us.
ask the question.
Yeah, let him go.
It'll be quick and easy to get to you.
I've got a 79 172N with a 320 H2AD
Oh,
engine that needs the Lycoming additive
the famous
or
H2AD,
the
right?
equivalent. Can I still put the Camguard in there with it?
You can put the Camguard in there. Technically, you're also supposed to have the Lycoming snake oil, so you should like use Aeroshell W100 Plus instead of W100. The Camguard has an anti-scuff additive package. It's actually better than the snake oil, but it's not exactly compliant with the AD. So, I mean, if it were my engine, I probably would just put the Camguard in, but if somebody is scrutinizing what you're doing, then technically you're supposed to have the snake oil is actually triphenyl phosphate. It's LW1602, I think.
I haven't seen one of those engines in my
Lycoming
shop in
part
I
a
don't have one of
particularly
those.
long time.
But it's pre-blended in with Aeroshell W100 Plus, Aeroshell 15W50, which don't use that one. And the Philips Victory oil also has it pre-blended in.
Here you go. All right, so I'm off stage, but I'm still going to ask this question. Thank y'all. All right, Gregory Hurst or Gregory Hart from Baltimore, Maryland. Way back. I'm going to ask for you since you're way back there. And this is interesting. Some electronic magnetos offer automatic timing advance. Have you seen any downsides to this setup in carbureted GA engines? So carbureted electronic magnetos, automatic timing advance.
Right.
So the real concern is that they advance too far and you get into detonation. There are some airplanes that tolerate how aggressive the timing is. I don't know how, 172, is that right? What airplane do you have? Cherokee 180, okay. Lycoming engine. So I don't know how aggressive, or which one we're talking about. You would find out real quick by watching your CHT. So when you're climbing, full power, wide open throttle, full rich mixture, if your CHTs are going too high, you have a real, well, higher than they were when you just had magnetos, then your timing advance is too much. So advanced timing will be higher CHTs and lower EGTs. Retarded timing is just the opposite. So you can, before you install electronic ignition, go out and do some flights, record engine parameters so you know what norm is. So when you upgrade, and I have one on the left side of my airplane, and I'm seriously considering putting one on the right side as
You're
well.
injected, though.
I'm still a different engine. I'm just saying the technology is pretty wonderful, and I'm not advertising for anybody, but it's something we're all going to start considering because reliability issues and all
Works
that.
great in your car, too, right? I mean,
Yeah, but cars are smart. So
Yeah.
the newest engine in the room that's certified is like 1950s technology. So we're adding, we're putting a patch on a wine bottle, and you've got to be careful that the patch doesn't tear the old wine
Doesn't
bottle.
say Miller.
Yeah, right.
Paul, I really don't think that detonation is ever going to be an issue, because those things only advance the timing at very low manifold pressures, where the engine is just not going to be detonating as long as it's
It may be, yeah.
cruise?
But
compliant fuel. But it is important to know that when you enable the variable timing, you will have higher CHTs in cruise, because it's a feature, not a bug. And as long as those higher CHTs aren't excessive, then you're getting all the benefits of the variable timing, which is, better fuel economy and a little more power and stuff. So like as Paul said, just keep an eye on your CHTs, and if they're not excessive, you're good. We've had a very small number of clients who were uncomfortable with the CHTs they were seeing and decided to disable the variable timing feature. And you don't have to enable it. And in fact, if you install it on a turbocharged airplane, you're not allowed to use it. It has to be fixed timing. But most of them do very well with the variable timing, and it does have advantages in terms of fuel economy and a little bit extra power.
Yeah.
reliability, and as Mike said, you can try it. If you don't like it, you don't have to take the electronics off, just switch them off.
Right.
It's good.
All right, late breaking question from Jack, who was just here a second ago. He's got a Piper J3, and I'm interested in this too, because I've got a Piper Tri-Pacer, and I have a similar issue. Jack has a Piper J3 with a C85, a stroker crank, 0-200 rods, pistons and cylinders, et cetera, et cetera. Total time only about 40 hours, 40 hours. But after flying, Jack has found that oil is all over the belly and no visible leaks. It's coming out of the carb heat box, maybe? He can't find anything that will fix it. What do you think the problem is? I know the answer on the Tri-Pacer, but go ahead.
So this is a dry sump engine with an oil tank, so oil overfilling the oil level isn't going to cause this like it would in a wet sump engine, right?
So it would be vent tube,
Crankshaft seal?
crankshaft seal.
Well, then it'd be getting all over the windshield.
Well, but you know, when oil gets all over, it gets all over, and you can't
Yeah,
tell
that's
where it's coming from, period.
But
So,
what about the location of the breather line?
Well, that's what I was suggesting. If the breather line is down into the airstream, if the what do you call that when you cut an angle in a tube? Scarf.
It's
If the
scarf.
scarf is either at the wrong angle or turned the wrong direction, you can actually create a vacuum on the crankcase that sucks
is that it?
the fumes.
Bingo on the
Winner, winner, chicken
Tri-Pacer.
dinner.
Oh, one in a row! Yay!
That was a trick question.
So you're saying the scarf, well, that's a
Was the
great
long
word.
way,
That wasn't
yeah.
in my vocabulary before. I thought that was something you
This
put
isn't a
around your
wing
neck,
repair,
but that's
Paul.
excellent.
That's a
So it could
welding
form
guy.
a little bit of a vacuum and pull that oil
But you're
out of
saying
that
maybe the
breather
scarf
too.
is pointing in the wrong direction.
It could be, or
Yeah.
the tube is.
What's, he thinks it's carving out of the carb box, though.
That's different.
If there's oil in your carb heat box, there's something really bad
well,
wrong.
then that's coming up through an intake valve guide. That's what that has to mean. That C85 doesn't have intake valve oil seals, so it's.
But how would
just
that get down to the carb air box?
Yeah, it's going the wrong way,
Yeah,
right?
it's going the wrong direction.
That's exactly where it goes, Paul. Think about it. If you have a wallered out intake. Oh, is that the think about it position? I like that. He can't talk
is
and
the
think at
thinker.
the same time. So, but if you have let's say a wallered out intake guide.
Everybody knows the difference between wallered and hogged. I'm not going to explain it. Listen, go ahead.
But wallered was the right
it's the
word.
proper
wasn't it?
term.
Yeah.
Good.
Hog implies intentionality.
That's right.
Like there is no.
That's right.
Then you've got a vacuum in the intake manifold. Okay.
Okay.
It's going to suck oil from the rocker box through the wallered out guide into the intake port, where it is going to fall down into through the
Oh,
carburetor.
I'm
and
thinking
it-
while the engine's running, it's getting sucked into the
Oh, yeah,
cylinder.
I was thinking the engine running.
Yeah.
You're saying
Yeah,
it's
It
shut
is?
down.
No, it is when the engine's
I
running.
had that, excuse me, I pulled a cylinder and took it to the engine shop, and they checked the valve guide. He said it's brand new. It's just perfect.
Which cylinder did you pull?
Just one, but
Just one.
I figured the rest of them
Well-
are new. They should be the same.
Yeah, I mean, what we do is we borescope the cylinders with the intake valves open and look at the back side of the intake valve with the borescope, and it should be dry. If
It
If you have one that's
Well-
wet, then you know that that's where the oil's going.
And if you don't have a borescope, there's 250 people out here that would be happy to help you with that.
All right, that was a mystery.
That
That's,
is
but that's pretty
interesting.
much the only way oil can get into the intake.
Yeah.
Is through a.
That would be
an
weird. I
intake
have not
guide.
seen that.
Yeah, on the Tri-Pacer, it's simply the breather is down in the airstream.
Yeah, you get
and
it
it's
down too
getting-
far,
And it's getting
creates a
it
vacuum.
vacuum.
But that would account for oil on the belly, but it wouldn't account for oil in the
Right, yeah.
airbox.
Yeah.
All right, so this is an interesting question from Mike Wilson of New Jersey. Mike, where are you? I'm going to let you ask it since you were on the front row.
Don't stand up.
Yeah, and next time, if y'all want, sit on the front row and get your questions asked and have the mic at the same time.
How you doing? So I know a couple episodes ago you spoke about myths. So I've always been told, you know, when I was a student, 1,000 RPM, leave it there, and I never was learned or never been told to like lean, you know, previously. So I started flying with a partner of mine, and he would always kind of let it. He'd start it, and as we're taxiing, he'd let it go down to 700. Didn't really lean much. As we were learning more. I guess the question is, should you allow, after start and taxiing, to save your brakes, should you allow it to go down to 600, 700 while you're taxiing? I don't do that now. I kind of lean it myself, and I try to leave it no longer, maybe 800 at most. Just trying to understand that myth of, should you always keep it at 100 RPM or 1,000 RPM, and not keeping
Are
it
we
ripped all
trying
the
to
time.
scavenge?
I mean, most
1,000? Is that
engines,
what-
if they're set up right, will run smoothly down to 600 or 700.
Yeah, I mean,
think
I
it's-
would always think less is better.
Lead fouling is
Are
something
you
what
worried
he's
about?
talking about.
So you want to do scavenge?
But the main thing is you want to be
Lean
leaning
the hell out
aggressively
of
on
it,
the ground.
yeah.
That's the
Almost-
mistake most people make is to not lean aggressively when they're on the ground.
When I pull off the runway, I flaps up and I lean right because I'm going to be taxiing back. I mean, anytime I'm just at low RPM, I'm definitely.
George Brawley uses the term for ground leaning. He says lean brutally.
Brutally.
Kind of like, which is like lean as far as you can before the engine stumbles when you throttle up a little bit.
Yeah.
And
If you don't, so you do your engine run up. This is the way I tell people to do it. 1,800 RPM, whatever your run up is. Pull the mixture back till you get an RPM rise.
Right.
Lycoming now recommends this for the new Cessna airplanes for a mag check. And if you get that RPM rise, that's about where you want to be. Mark that on your mixture knob and just pull it to that. As soon as you start the engine, go right to that.
yeah,
And you're
As
fine.
It warms up just a little bit.
Right. And then when you're on the takeoff roll,
Which-
you will forget to put the mixture
Yeah,
knob
don't
in.
forget to put the mixture back in.
And the really wonderful thing that'll happen is when you push the throttle forward, it's
It'll
too
die.
lean to run, and the engine dies. It's embarrassing, but if you don't lean brutally, if you don't
would
lean
never catch
brutally,
it, yeah.
you find out you forgot to push the mixture knob at about 500 feet when the cylinders are melting. So if you're going to lean on the ground, highly recommended.
Everything forward when you're going for your
Yeah.
takeoff.
But if you
and-
forget,
Failure to lean on the ground. Again, that my old flight instructor, the one that taught me that the engine blow up if I run it over square, also told me never lean on the ground. And it turns out that not leaning on the ground is probably the single biggest cause of valve sticking in Lycomings and in the older Continentals like the A and C series engines. It's really important to lean brutally during
when you
all
look
ground
at-
operations.
Look at a borescope, you can see all the lead on those cylinders. When people who have long taxis and forget to lean, you can tell those aircraft.
Yeah, most of the POHs recommend that you go full rich for the run-up. Don't do it.